Welcome to the Sleepy Stoic. Tonight, we turn our attention to one of the most practical philosophical texts ever written. Not a grand treatise on metaphysics, not an elaborate dialogue exploring abstract truths, but a handbook, a manual, a set of simple instructions meant to be carried with you, consulted daily, and applied to the actual circumstances of your life. The Enchiridion of Epictetus. The word itself means handbook or manual, the kind of thing a soldier might keep in his pack or a craftsman in his workshop. Something compact, essential, immediately useful. Epictetus did not write it himself. He was a teacher, and like Socrates before him, he spoke rather than wrote. His student Arion listened carefully to his lectures and distilled their essence into this remarkable little book. Perhaps 53 brief chapters depending on which version you encounter. Some are only a sentence or two. Others extend to a paragraph or more. But each one offers guidance you can use today. This is philosophy as toolkit. Philosophy not as something to admire from a distance or debate in academic settings, but as something to carry with you into the marketplace, into your home, into the difficult conversations and unexpected challenges that make up the texture of daily life. The Enchiridion is meant to be portable, memorable, practical. It assumes you are not living in ideal conditions. It assumes you will face frustration, disappointment, loss, difficult people, circumstances beyond your control. And it offers you a way to meet all of this with steadiness. Epictetus himself knew something about difficult circumstances. He was born into slavery around the year 50 of the Common Era in Hierapolis, a city in what is now Turkey. His name itself was not really a name, but a common Greek word meaning acquired one or possession. He was property. As a slave in Rome, he served in the household of Epictetus, himself a freed slave who had become secretary to the Emperor Nero. At some point, Epictetus suffered an injury to his leg, leaving him permanently lame. Ancient sources differ on whether this was the result of deliberate cruelty or accident, but the result was the same. He lived in pain with limited freedom, with the daily reality of being owned by another person. And yet he discovered philosophy. Somehow he gained access to Stoic teachings, perhaps through the lectures of Musonius Rufus, one of the great Stoic teachers of that era. Philosophy gave him something no master could take away. It gave him inner freedom. Eventually he was freed from legal slavery, though the circumstances are unclear. He began to teach, gathering students who recognized in him something rare. A man who had tested philosophical principles against the hardest circumstances and found them adequate. When the Emperor Domitian expelled philosophers from Rome around the year 93, Epictetus moved to Nicopolis in northwestern Greece and established a school there. He taught for the rest of his long life, and among his students was Arion, who would preserve his teachings. The Enchiridion that Arion compiled was meant to be exactly what its name suggests: a handbook for students to take with them when they left the school. Not the complete philosophy, but the essential practices. The core principles you needed to remember when facing actual situations. Think of it as the distillation of years of teaching into something you could review every morning, something you could return to when you found yourself reacting badly to events, something you could use to reset your thinking when you had been pulled off course. This handbook format is itself philosophically significant. It suggests that philosophy is not primarily about knowing but about doing. Not about accumulating information but about transforming how you meet the world. The Enchiridion does not argue its points in elaborate detail. It does not offer extensive justifications for its principles. It assumes you have already accepted the basic Stoic framework, or at least that you are willing to try it out. What it offers instead are reminders, practices, rules of thumb, tells you what to do. And this brings us to something important about the nature of philosophical practice. The rules in the Enchiridion are simple. Not easy, but simple. There is a significant difference. Something can be simple to understand and yet require a lifetime of practice to embody. The dichotomy of control, the first and most fundamental teaching of the Enchiridion, can be stated in a single sentence. Some things are up to us and some things are not. A child can understand this, and yet applying this distinction consistently, in all circumstances, with full clarity about what truly falls within your control and what does not, becomes the work of years. Perhaps the work of a lifetime. This is why philosophy must be daily practice. You cannot read the Enchiridion once, nod in agreement, and consider yourself a Stoic. The handbook is meant to be returned to again and again. The rules are meant to be applied, tested against experience, refined in your understanding, applied again. They are meant to become second nature, but that happens only through repetition, through consistent effort, through the patient work of training your mind to respond differently than it has been trained by habit and culture and instinct. Epictetus often used the metaphor of athletic training. A wrestler does not become skilled by reading about wrestling or by understanding the theory of holds and throws. He becomes skilled by practicing, by drilling the same movements until they become automatic, until his body responds correctly without conscious thought. Philosophy works the same way. You train your mind through repeated practice until the correct response becomes natural, until you automatically apply the dichotomy of control instead of uselessly struggling against what you cannot change, until you instinctively examine your judgments instead of being carried away by first impressions. The transformation that philosophy offers is not a sudden enlightenment but a gradual retraining. It is the accumulation of small corrections, made consistently over time, until they reshape the fundamental patterns of your thinking and reacting. This is why the handbook format is so appropriate. You need something you can consult daily, something that reminds you of the basics when you have forgotten them, something that calls you back to your principles when you have been swept away by emotion or circumstance. Tonight, we will work through the Enchiridion carefully, not rushing, taking time with each principle to understand not just what it says but how it might be applied, what it looks like in practice, why it matters. We will move slowly because these teachings deserve slowness. They deserve attention. They are deceptively simple on the surface, and their depth reveals itself only to patient consideration. We will not take the chapters in strict order, though we will certainly address the opening teachings that establish the foundation. Instead, we will group related principles together, exploring themes as they develop across the text. We will consider the dichotomy of control, the nature of judgments, the practice of acceptance, the cultivation of inner freedom, the proper use of impressions, the discipline of desire and aversion, the art of relationships, the handling of difficult emotions, the preparation for adversity, and the development of character. Each of these themes appears throughout the Enchiridion in various formulations, and each deserves sustained attention. As we explore these teachings, you might find yourself in different relationships to the material depending on the time of day, your state of mind, your current circumstances. If you are listening actively, engaged with the ideas, using this as a learning experience, you will find substantive philosophical content to think through, to question, to consider against your own experience. The teachings are presented clearly enough that you can grasp them intellectually and begin thinking about their application. If, on the other hand, you are listening more passively, perhaps as you settle towards sleep, perhaps as calming background while your mind winds down from the day, the gentle repetition and the slow, steady exploration of ideas can serve a different purpose. The calm tone, the unhurried pace, the return again and again to core principles can be soothing even when you are not actively tracking every argument. Philosophy, at its best, has this dual quality. It can engage the active intellect fully, and it can also provide a kind of background order, a sense that you are in the presence of careful thinking even when you are not following every step. The Stoics themselves recognized different modes of engagement with philosophy. There is the time for active study, for wrestling with difficult concepts, for examining your judgments and correcting your thinking. And there is also the time for letting philosophical principles settle into the background of your mind, for allowing them to work on you indirectly, for resting in the general atmosphere of wisdom even when you are not making specific applications. We will begin, as the Enchiridion itself begins, with the fundamental distinction that underlies all of Stoic practice. This is the teaching that Epictetus considered so essential that he placed it first, that he returned to again and again in various formulations, that he insisted his students had to grasp before anything else could be properly understood. It is the dichotomy of control, though that precise phrase is a modern rendering. Epictetus speaks more directly. Some things are up to us and some things are not up to us. What is up to us? Your opinions, your impulses, your desires and aversions, the way you deal with impressions. In short, everything that is truly your own action. These belong to you. They are in the sphere of your choice. No external force can control them unless you allow it. What is not up to us? Your body, your property, your reputation, your position in society. In short, everything that is not your own action. These things are ultimately controlled by external factors. They depend on circumstances, on other people, on chance, on the nature of physical reality. You can influence some of these things to varying degrees, but you do not have final control over them. This distinction seems simple enough when stated. Of course, we cannot control everything. Of course, some things depend on external factors. Everyone knows this, and yet observe how you actually respond when something goes wrong. Notice where you direct your frustration, your anxiety, your effort. You become upset because someone does not approve of you, but their approval is not up to you. You worry anxiously about whether you will get the job, win the competition, recover from the illness. But the final outcome of these things is not up to you. You exhaust yourself trying to control circumstances that are fundamentally beyond your control. The Stoic claim is not that you should be passive, that you should never try to influence outcomes in the external world. Of course you should act in the world. Of course you should do what you can to bring about preferred outcomes. But you should do so with clarity about where your true power lies. Your power lies in your choices, your efforts, your intentions, your character. The outcomes themselves are not up to you. This means that your peace of mind, your freedom, your fulfillment cannot depend on things working out the way you want them to in the external world. If your peace depends on other people behaving the way you want, you have placed your peace in their hands. If your fulfillment depends on your health never failing, on your plans never being disrupted, on circumstances always favoring you, then you have guaranteed your own unhappiness. Because these things will not always cooperate. Bodies fail. Plans go awry. circumstances shift. Other people pursue their own interests, not yours. The Enchiridion offers a different possibility. It suggests that you can be free, fulfilled, at peace regardless of external circumstances, because these states depend not on the externals themselves but on how you relate to them. Your freedom lies not in controlling the world, but in perfecting your responses to whatever the world presents. Your peace comes not from having everything go your way, but from accepting with equanimity whatever comes, focusing your energy on what is truly yours to control. This is the inner citadel that Marcus Aurelius speaks of in his personal writings. It is the space within you that remains untouched by external events because it does not depend on them. You can be imprisoned as Epictetus was, and yet be free in the way that matters most. You can lose property, reputation, physical health, and yet retain your character, your choices, your dignity as a rational being. No one can take these from you unless you hand them over. But we do hand them over constantly. We hand over our peace of mind to anyone who criticizes us, to any circumstance that does not match our preferences, to any uncertainty about future outcomes. We make our happiness conditional on things we do not control, and then we suffer when those things do not cooperate. The Enchiridion is, in large part, a manual for taking back what is yours, for repositioning your sense of well-being from the external to the internal, from what you cannot control to what you can. This repositioning is not a matter of pretending that external things do not matter. The Stoics recognize that health is preferable to sickness, wealth to poverty, good reputation to bad. These are what they called preferred indifference. They are genuinely preferable when you have a choice, and it is rational to pursue them appropriately. But they are indifferent in the sense that they do not determine whether you live well in the deepest sense. They do not determine whether you fulfill your nature as a rational being, whether you develop an excellent character, whether you act with virtue. Virtue, for the Stoics, is the only true good. It is the only thing that is always beneficial, that always improves the one who has it, that can never be taken away or lost through bad fortune. And virtue lies entirely within the sphere of what is up to you. You can be virtuous in any circumstances. You can act with wisdom, justice, courage, and self-control whether you are rich or poor, healthy or sick, honored or despised. This is the foundation of Stoic freedom. Your flourishing does not depend on fortune because it does not depend on what fortune can give or take away. The Enchiridion teaches you how to make this real in practice, how to actually live from this understanding rather than just agreeing with it intellectually. It teaches you to examine your impressions before accepting them, to notice when you are adding judgments to bare facts, to catch yourself in the moment when you are about to be swept away by an emotion based on something outside your control. It teaches you to frame desires carefully, to want only what is within your power to achieve, so that you are never left frustrated and grasping. It teaches you to prepare for difficulties before they arrive, to practice in imagination the challenges you might face, so that you are not caught off guard when they occur. It teaches you how to relate to other people without making your peace dependent on their cooperation, how to fulfill your social roles without being enslaved by others' expectations, how to act appropriately in every situation while maintaining your inner freedom. These lessons are what we will explore together over the coming hours. We will move carefully through the practical wisdom the Enchiridion offers, taking time to consider not just what Epictetus taught, but why it matters, how it applies, what it looks like when you try to live it out. This is philosophy as practice, philosophy as a set of tools you can actually use, philosophy as daily discipline that gradually transforms how you experience your life. The transformation the Enchiridion offers is not dramatic in any single moment. You will not read a chapter and suddenly become a sage. But if you return to these teachings consistently, if you practice applying them to the actual circumstances of your days, if you are patient with yourself when you fail and willing to start again, something shifts. Gradually, you find that you are less disturbed by things that used to upset you deeply. You find that you can accept disappointments without being crushed by them, that you can face difficulties without being overwhelmed, that you can engage with the world while maintaining an inner steadiness. This steadiness is not indifference. It is not coldness or detachment from life. It is rather a deep stability that allows you to engage more fully, to be present to what is actually happening rather than being constantly caught up in resistance, anxiety, and grasping. When you are not frantically trying to control what you cannot control, you have energy available for what you actually can do. When you are not defining your worth by externals, you are free to act according to your values regardless of the outcome. When you are not dependent on others' approval, you can relate to them more honestly, more generously, without the constant anxiety of managing impressions. This is the promise of the Enchiridion. Not that your life will become easy, not that you will never face hardship or pain, but that you will have a way to meet whatever comes with dignity and freedom. You will have principles to guide you, practices to steady you, a philosophical framework that makes sense of difficulty and grounds you in something that cannot be taken away. So let us begin this careful exploration. We start with the most fundamental principles and build outward from there, always keeping in view the practical question. How does this help me live better? How does this apply to real situations? What does it look like to actually practice this teaching? We have examined the foundational structure of the Enchiridion, understanding it as a portable manual for living well. Now we move deeper into the teachings themselves, exploring specific instructions that Epictetus offers for transforming the way we meet each day. Consider the opening principle of the handbook, the one that stands as gateway to all others. Epictetus tells us plainly that some things are up to us and others are not. What is up to us includes our judgments, our impulses, our desires and aversions, and in summary, whatever actions are our own. What is not up to us includes our body, our property, our reputation, our position in society, and in summary, whatever is not our own action. This distinction appears simple at first encounter. Yet we might spend an entire lifetime exploring its depths and still discover new applications. The handbook format serves us well here, for it allows us to return again and again to this fundamental division, testing it against our experience, refining our understanding through practice. The things that are up to us, Epictetus says, are by nature free, unhindered, and unimpeded. The things not up to us are weak, slavish, subject to hindrance, and belonging to others. This is not merely philosophy articulated for intellectual satisfaction. This is instruction for action, guidance meant to be applied moment by moment throughout our days. When we treat things that are not up to us as if they were within our control, we create our own suffering. We grasp at what cannot be held. We resist what cannot be changed by our will alone. We place our peace of mind in the hands of fortune, circumstance, and the choices of others. The handbook alerts us to this confusion and calls us back to what is genuinely our own. What belongs to us truly is the use of our impressions, our capacity to judge rightly or wrongly about what appears before us. No external force can compel us to assent to a false judgment. No circumstance can force us to desire what harms us or to avoid what benefits us. This inner domain remains ours even when all outer circumstances turn against us. The handbook reminds us repeatedly of this distinction because we forget it repeatedly. We begin our day with good intentions. Then within an hour we find ourselves disturbed by traffic, by weather, by the opinions others hold of us, by news we cannot change. We have forgotten the opening principle. We have stepped outside the boundary of what is ours and attempted to control what belongs to fortune. Epictetus understood human nature. He knew that we need reminders, clear and simple, that we can carry with us and consult throughout the day. The handbook form acknowledges our tendency to forget and provides a structure for remembering. Each brief instruction serves as a touchstone, a way of reorienting ourselves when we lose our way. When we truly grasp this foundational teaching, we begin to see how much energy we waste in futile struggles. We exhaust ourselves trying to control the uncontrollable. We make ourselves anxious over outcomes that depend on factors beyond our influence. We suffer not from the things themselves but from our judgments about them and our insistence that they should be other than they are. The practice begins with recognition. We notice when we are disturbed, and we ask ourselves what impression has caused this disturbance. We examine whether we are attempting to control something that is not up to us. We practice withdrawing our assent from false judgments and redirecting our attention to what is genuinely within our power. This is simple instruction but profound in its implications. The handbook does not offer complex theories that require years of study before application. It offers clear principles that we can begin using immediately, even if we spend a lifetime deepening our understanding of them. The Enchiridion continues with instructions about how to encounter impressions as they arise. When some impression appears to us, Epictetus advises that we should say to it, "You are an impression, and not at all the thing you appear to be." Then we should examine it according to the rules we have, testing it particularly by this first rule, whether it concerns things that are up to us or things that are not up to us. If it concerns something not up to us, we should be ready to say, "This is nothing to me." This practice requires vigilance but not strain. We are not trying to suppress impressions or deny that they appear. We are simply recognizing them for what they are, mere appearances that require our judgment before they become beliefs that govern our actions. The handbook teaches us to pause, to create space between impression and response, to exercise our capacity for rational examination. Consider what happens when someone speaks harshly to us. The impression arises, "I have been insulted. I have been wronged. This person is treating me unjustly." If we immediately assent to these impressions without examination, we find ourselves disturbed, angry, planning retaliation, or nursing resentment. We have placed our peace in the hands of another person's words. But if we follow the handbook's instruction, we pause. We recognize, this is an impression, not necessarily the truth of what has occurred. We examine it. Is their opinion of me something up to me? No, their judgments belong to them. Is my own worth determined by their words? No, my character is determined by my own choices and actions. What is actually up to me here? My response, my judgment about what has happened, my choice to remain undisturbed. This practice transforms our experience. We discover freedom not by changing external circumstances, but by changing our relationship to them. The handbook provides the method, the clear steps we can take when impressions arise. We do not need to achieve perfect wisdom before beginning. We simply need to start practicing with whatever wisdom we currently possess. Epictetus knew that most people live as slaves to their impressions, tossed about by every appearance, reacting without reflection, placing their happiness in things beyond their control. The handbook offers liberation from this slavery, not through escape from the world, but through mastery of our own faculty of judgment. The rules in the handbook are not arbitrary restrictions imposed from outside. They are descriptions of how our rational nature functions when it operates properly. When we fail to examine our impressions, we act against our own nature as rational beings. When we exercise judgment wisely, we fulfill our nature and experience the freedom that belongs to us by right. This understanding helps us approach the handbook not as a set of burdensome obligations, but as a guide to our own liberation. Each rule clarifies how to use our faculties well, how to align our judgments with reality, how to desire and avoid in ways that serve our well-being rather than undermine it. The practice becomes easier with repetition, though it remains always a practice rather than a permanent achievement. We will forget. We will find ourselves disturbed by impressions we failed to examine. We will assent to false judgments and suffer the consequences. The handbook invites us not to despair at these failures, but to return to the practice, to examine what went wrong, to renew our commitment to exercising judgment wisely. We might think of the handbook as a training manual for the mind, providing exercises that strengthen our capacity for right judgment just as physical exercises strengthen the body. Each time we pause to examine an impression, each time we distinguish what is up to us from what is not, we grow stronger in our practice. The transformation happens gradually through consistent application of simple principles. Among the handbook's most striking instructions are those concerning desire and aversion. Epictetus tells us plainly that if we avoid only those things that are contrary to nature among the things that are up to us, we shall never fall into anything we want to avoid. But if we try to avoid disease, death, or poverty, we shall be miserable, for these things are not up to us. This teaching confronts us with an uncomfortable truth. Much of what we spend our energy trying to avoid cannot actually be avoided by our will alone. We can take reasonable precautions against illness, but we cannot guarantee health. We can work diligently, but we cannot ensure wealth against all possible turns of fortune. We can live carefully, but we cannot prevent death. When we place our aversion on these things, we guarantee our own misery, for we have made our peace depend on what we cannot control. The handbook redirects our aversion toward what is genuinely harmful and actually up to us, our own vices, our own errors of judgment, our own failures to use our rational faculty well. These we can avoid if we choose to. These are proper objects of aversion because they are within our power and genuinely harm us. This teaching applies equally to desire. The handbook instructs us to eliminate desire entirely for a time while we are still in training, to suspend wanting anything that is not up to us. This seems harsh at first, even inhuman. Are we not to desire health, security, comfort? Are we to become cold, detached, indifferent to the goods that make life pleasant? But Epictetus is not counseling indifference to preferred things. He is counseling us to recognize that our well-being cannot depend on obtaining them. We may reasonably prefer health to sickness, just as we prefer warm weather to cold. But we do not need warm weather for our happiness, and we do not make ourselves miserable when it rains. The handbook asks us to extend this same equanimity to all things not up to us. The training Epictetus describes involves temporarily suspending desire for externals so that we can strengthen our understanding of where our good truly lies. Once we are firmly grounded in this understanding, we can engage with preferred things appropriately, pursuing them reasonably while maintaining our peace regardless of whether we obtain them. This is subtle teaching easily misunderstood. We are not learning to care about nothing. We are learning to care rightly, to invest our peace and happiness in what is genuinely up to us rather than in what fortune controls. We are learning the difference between preference and attachment, between reasonable pursuit and desperate grasping. When we desire things not up to us as if our happiness depends on them, we make ourselves slaves to fortune. We experience constant anxiety about whether we will obtain what we want and keep what we have. We suffer when things go otherwise than we wish. We make our inner life dependent on outer circumstances that change independently of our will. The handbook teaches us to redirect desire toward what is always available to us. Excellent use of our rational capacity, virtuous action, wise judgment, appropriate responses to whatever occurs. These we can always pursue regardless of circumstance. These are goods that cannot be taken from us. These are sources of satisfaction that do not depend on fortune's favor. This transformation of desire and aversion is central to the Stoic path. When we practice it consistently, we discover a profound shift in our experience. We find ourselves less anxious, less disappointed, less tossed about by changing circumstances. We find that we can engage fully with life while remaining inwardly stable. We discover that peace is possible not because everything goes as we wish, but because our happiness no longer depends on everything going as we wish. The handbook format serves us well here again. We need these reminders about desire and aversion because our habitual patterns run deep. We slip back into old ways of wanting, old patterns of anxiety and grasping. The simple rules provide anchors we can return to, touchstones for reorienting ourselves when we lose our way. The Enchiridion addresses our roles and relationships with particular care, for these occupy much of our daily life and provide frequent occasions for disturbance. Epictetus instructs us to remember what we are in each situation, what character we are meant to play. If we are in the role of friend, we should act as a friend. If we are in the role of parent, we should act as a parent. Each role carries appropriate actions, and fulfilling our roles well is up to us even when the outcomes are not. This teaching about roles helps us navigate the complexity of human life while maintaining our inner freedom. We engage fully with our relationships and responsibilities without making our peace depend on how others respond or what results follow from our actions. We focus on performing our part well, which is up to us, rather than controlling the whole drama, which is not. When we attend a social gathering, we are there in a particular role. We are not required to be the most entertaining person present. We are not obligated to win everyone's approval. We are simply called to fulfill our role as guest appropriately, contributing to the gathering as fits the circumstances, maintaining our own dignity and treating others with respect. Whether others judge us favorably is not up to us and need not disturb us. The handbook reminds us that in each role we play, we have access to virtue. The parent can exercise wisdom and patience. The friend can demonstrate loyalty and honesty. The citizen can act with justice and civic responsibility. These excellences are up to us regardless of external circumstances. We can practice virtue whether we are wealthy or poor, praised or blamed, successful in worldly terms or not. This understanding liberates us from the exhausting attempt to control how others perceive us or respond to us. We cannot make others love us, though we can act lovingly. We cannot force others to appreciate us, though we can act in ways worthy of appreciation. We cannot guarantee that our children will turn out exactly as we hope, though we can fulfill our parental duties with dedication and wisdom. The distinction between our proper role and what lies beyond it preserves our peace. Epictetus himself lived this teaching. As a slave, he fulfilled that role with dignity, neither rebelling uselessly nor internalizing the judgment that he was inferior. When he was freed and became a teacher, he fulfilled that role with dedication, neither claiming more authority than was proper nor shirking his responsibility to guide students toward wisdom. He adapted to circumstances while maintaining his inner freedom. The handbook asks us to examine our relationships and responsibilities with clear eyes. Where have we confused our role with others' roles? Where have we tried to control what belongs to them? Where have we neglected what genuinely belongs to us? This examination helps us act more effectively because we focus our energy where it actually makes a difference. Consider the role of teacher or mentor. We are responsible for preparing lessons well, for explaining clearly, for creating conditions conducive to learning, for treating students with respect and care. We are not responsible for whether students choose to learn, whether they achieve the results we hope for them, whether they appreciate our efforts. When we understand this distinction, we can teach wholeheartedly without the burden of trying to control outcomes beyond our influence. The same applies to every role we occupy. As colleagues, we can offer cooperation and competence. As neighbors, we can be considerate and helpful. As citizens, we can fulfill our civic duties conscientiously. In each case, the handbook calls us to focus on what is genuinely up to us, performing our part well while releasing our grip on what others do with their parts. This is not resignation or passivity. We engage fully with our roles and relationships. We bring our best efforts to them. We care deeply about others and about the quality of our interactions. But we distinguish between caring and controlling, between commitment and attachment, between doing what is ours to do and demanding particular outcomes. The handbook addresses misfortune directly, offering guidance for how to meet difficulties when they arise. When something happens that seems unfortunate, Epictetus instructs us to remember that this impression is nothing to the thing itself but only to our judgment about it. He reminds us that we have the power to form different judgments, to see the same circumstances from other perspectives, to find opportunities for virtue in what appears to be mere adversity. This teaching does not deny that painful things occur. Loss is real. Illness is real. Disappointment is real. The handbook does not ask us to pretend that difficulties are pleasant or that all outcomes are equally desirable. Instead, it asks us to recognize that our suffering comes primarily not from events themselves, but from our judgments about them and our resistance to what has occurred. When we lose something we valued, we can judge this as terrible, as unfair, as proof that life is cruel. Or we can judge it as an opportunity to practice equanimity, as a reminder of impermanence, as a chance to discover that our happiness does not depend on external possessions. Both judgments are available to us. The handbook teaches us to choose judgments that preserve our peace and strengthen our character. This is not mere positive thinking or forced optimism. It is clear-eyed recognition that we retain power over our inner life even when we have no power over outer circumstances. We can meet misfortune with dignity rather than collapse. We can maintain our capacity for virtuous action regardless of what happens to us. We can find meaning and opportunity in difficulty rather than seeing only loss and limitation. Epictetus used his own circumstances to illustrate this teaching. He was born into slavery, experienced physical hardship, lived under the arbitrary power of masters who could mistreat him at will. Yet he maintained his inner freedom and developed wisdom that freed others. He demonstrated that philosophy is not merely for those with comfortable circumstances, but especially for those who face genuine difficulties. The handbook includes a practice for preparing ourselves to meet difficulties. We should rehearse mentally the things that might go wrong, not to make ourselves anxious, but to remove the shock of unexpected misfortune. If we have considered that we might lose what we currently possess, we will not be overwhelmed when loss occurs. If we have remembered that those we love are mortal, we will be better prepared to face death with acceptance rather than bitter resentment. This practice, which later Stoics called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, serves not to darken our mood but to stabilize it. When we acknowledge clearly that things can go wrong, that we will eventually face illness, loss, and death, we appreciate what we have more fully in the present and we meet adversity more skillfully when it arrives. The handbook suggests specific rehearsals. When we kiss our child goodnight, we might remember that this child is mortal, not to feel morbid but to be present fully with love and appreciation. When we use our possessions, we might remember that they can be lost, not to hold them loosely from lack of care, but to hold them loosely from wisdom about their nature. When we enjoy health, we might remember that illness will come, not to spoil present pleasure, but to meet future pain with greater equanimity. This practice changes our relationship with fortune. We cease demanding that life conform to our preferences. We acknowledge reality as it actually is, including impermanence, uncertainty, and our limited control. From this acknowledgement comes a paradoxical freedom. We suffer less because we resist less. We fear less because we have faced what we fear and found that we can meet it with dignity. The handbook does not promise that practicing these teachings will make life easy or prevent all suffering. It promises something different and more valuable: that we can maintain our freedom and exercise virtue regardless of circumstances, that we can meet whatever comes with wisdom rather than being overwhelmed by it, that we can find our happiness in what is genuinely up to us rather than in what fortune controls. Among the handbook's most practical instructions are those concerning our daily interactions and how we speak with others. Epictetus advises us to be silent for the most part, speaking only when necessary and then briefly. He suggests that we avoid vulgar talk about ordinary things, about gladiators, athletes, food and drink, or the faults of others. These topics occupy most common conversation, yet they do little to strengthen our character or preserve our peace. This instruction might seem socially impractical. Are we to become awkward and isolated, unable to participate in ordinary human interaction? But Epictetus is not counseling total withdrawal from social life. He is teaching us to be intentional about how we use speech, recognizing that our words shape our character and influence our judgments. When we spend hours discussing matters beyond our control, we reinforce the habit of concerning ourselves with what is not up to us. When we criticize others constantly, we practice harsh judgment that we then turn on ourselves. When we engage in trivial talk merely to fill silence, we miss opportunities for reflection and strengthen our addiction to distraction. The handbook asks us to notice these patterns and choose differently. We can participate in social life while maintaining our philosophical practice. We can be pleasant company without abandoning our principles. We can listen with interest to others without losing ourselves in trivial concerns. We can speak when appropriate while remaining largely quiet, observing more than proclaiming, asking questions rather than holding forth with opinions about matters we have not examined carefully. The handbook particularly warns against speaking about our own philosophical studies in a boastful way or criticizing the philosophical ignorance of others. The student of philosophy should show by actions rather than words what has been learned. As Epictetus says, "Sheep do not show how much they have eaten by bringing grass to their shepherds, but they digest their food and then show it by producing wool and milk." Similarly, we should not display our philosophical readings, but rather the actions that follow from properly digesting them. This teaching guards against a particular trap for those who study philosophy: the temptation to use philosophical language as a way of claiming superiority over others. We may begin to lecture people who have not asked for instruction. We may speak about Stoic principles in a way that draws attention to our own wisdom rather than serving the other person. We may use philosophy to judge others harshly rather than to improve ourselves. The handbook redirects us toward genuine practice. We demonstrate our progress not by how well we can articulate Stoic principles, but by how consistently we apply them. We show our understanding not through eloquent discourse, but through patient action, wise choices, and equanimity in difficult circumstances. The true student becomes quieter about philosophy while living it more fully. This does not mean we never discuss philosophy or share what we are learning. In appropriate contexts, with those who are genuinely interested, such conversations serve real purposes. The handbook warns against casual philosophical talk that is more about self-display than genuine examination, against using philosophical language to impress others rather than to clarify truth, against speaking when we should be practicing. When we do speak, the handbook encourages us to speak carefully, turning conversations toward worthwhile topics when we can, gently redirecting discussions that have become merely destructive gossip or pointless complaint. We need not be preachy or superior about this. We can simply introduce a different perspective, ask a thoughtful question, or demonstrate by example that conversation can serve better purposes than mere distraction. We might notice how much energy we expend in useless talk, in rehashing grievances, in speculating about matters we cannot know, in giving advice that has not been requested. The handbook invites us to reclaim this energy, to use speech more deliberately, to cultivate interior silence that allows us to think clearly and choose wisely. This practice of mindful speech extends to how we speak to ourselves, the internal conversations we maintain throughout the day. Do we spend our mental energy criticizing ourselves and others? Do we rehearse conversations that have already happened or worry about ones that might happen? The handbook's principles about speech apply equally to our internal dialogue. The Enchiridion addresses our engagement with entertainment and public spectacles with characteristic directness. When we attend such events, Epictetus says, we should guard against being swept up in the crowd's enthusiasm, against shouting with them or becoming disturbed if things go otherwise than we prefer. We should maintain our inner composure even while participating in communal activities. This teaching recognizes that we live in community and reasonably participate in its gatherings and entertainments. We need not withdraw to achieve philosophical practice. But we should notice how easily we lose ourselves in collective emotions, how quickly we forget our principles when caught up in the excitement or disappointment of the crowd. Consider what happens at sporting events, concerts, or any gathering where collective emotion runs high. We find ourselves shouting, perhaps saying things we would not normally say, caught up in partisan feelings about outcomes that ultimately matter little. In the moment, it feels as though everything depends on which team wins or how the performance goes. We become disturbed if things go differently than we hoped. The handbook does not forbid such participation. It asks only that we maintain awareness, that we remember we are human beings capable of reason even while we join in communal activities. We can enjoy ourselves without losing ourselves. We can participate without being swept away. We can maintain our center even in the midst of collective enthusiasm. This principle extends beyond formal entertainments to all situations where we might be influenced by collective emotion or opinion. In meetings where everyone shares a particular view, can we maintain independent judgment? When social media erupts in outrage about some event, can we pause before joining the chorus? When everyone around us judges someone harshly, can we reserve our own judgment until we have examined the matter carefully? The handbook teaches us to be in the world without being swept along by it, to participate in communal life while maintaining our individual capacity for rational judgment. This is not about superiority or separation. It is about preserving our freedom to think and choose for ourselves rather than simply reacting as the crowd reacts. We practice this by noticing when we are being pulled into collective emotions. We feel the excitement rising, the urge to join in the shouting, the pull toward partisan feeling. In that moment, we can pause. We can remember that we are rational beings capable of choice. We can decide how we want to respond rather than simply being carried along. This does not mean we become cold or detached. We can feel enjoyment and enthusiasm while maintaining our awareness. We can share in communal celebrations while remembering what actually matters. We can be fully present without abandoning our principles or losing our capacity for independent judgment. The handbook's guidance about public entertainments serves as a microcosm for how we engage with the world generally. We are not called to withdraw or to hold ourselves apart with superiority. We are called to maintain our inner freedom while participating fully in human life, to keep our principles active even in situations that invite us to forget them, to remember what is genuinely important even when surrounded by people who have temporarily forgotten. This practice strengthens with repetition. Each time we maintain our composure in a situation that invites losing it, we grow more capable of inner stability. Each time we remember our principles when circumstances encourage forgetting them, we deepen our commitment to philosophical living. The handbook provides the reminder, but we must provide the practice. The manual sits in our pocket, so to speak, available for consultation before we attend the games, before we join the party, before we enter any situation where we might be swept up in collective emotion. We rehearse the principles. We prepare ourselves. We commit to maintaining awareness. Then we enter the situation with our capacity for choice intact, ready to participate fully while remaining inwardly free. These teachings from the Enchiridion work together as a complete system for maintaining equanimity and exercising virtue in daily life. Each instruction addresses a particular situation we are likely to encounter. Together, they provide comprehensive guidance for living philosophically in the midst of ordinary human circumstances. We return now to the handbook itself, to the small volume that slipped into traveling bags and soldiers' packs, that rested on bedside tables and accompanied philosophers on their evening walks. The Enchiridion is neither comprehensive system nor elaborate treatise. It is something more modest and perhaps more powerful, a collection of reminders, carefully selected and arranged, designed to be carried always, consulted frequently, applied immediately. Consider what this format tells us about Epictetus's understanding of philosophy. He does not assume that one profound reading will transform us. He does not imagine that intellectual comprehension alone changes behavior. Instead, he recognizes that transformation happens through repeated engagement, through returning again and again to fundamental principles, through testing these principles against the ever-changing circumstances of daily life. The handbook format embodies a particular vision of how learning works. We do not simply absorb wisdom once and carry it forward unchanged. We return to it. We read the same passages in different moods, different seasons, different stages of life. Each time we return, we bring new experiences, new questions, new resistances. The handbook remains stable while we change, providing a fixed reference point against which we can measure our growth or recognize our recurring patterns. This is why Epictetus arranged his teachings not as arguments to be proven, but as rules to be practiced. Each entry in the Enchiridion functions as a lens through which to view experience. Some of these lenses we will find immediately useful. Others will seem irrelevant until life presents us with precisely the situation they address. The handbook waits patiently, knowing that eventually every rule will find its moment of application. The genius of this format lies in its accessibility. Philosophical systems can overwhelm us with their scope and complexity. Abstract principles can float above lived experience, intellectually interesting but practically inert. But a rule is something we can work with. A rule gives us a specific way to respond when life confronts us. A rule translates philosophy into decision, theory into action. Yet we must be careful not to treat these rules mechanically, as if Stoicism were simply a matter of following instructions. The rules in the Enchiridion are not algorithms that guarantee specific outcomes. They are invitations to see differently, to question our automatic interpretations, to reclaim agency we did not know we possessed. Each rule requires us to pause, to reflect, to choose consciously rather than react habitually. When Epictetus tells us to distinguish between what is up to us and what is not, he offers more than a sorting principle. He invites us into a fundamentally different relationship with reality. When he advises us to examine our impressions before accepting them, he does not simply recommend skepticism. He opens a space between stimulus and response, a space where freedom lives. The handbook format also addresses the problem of memory and attention. We forget. Even principles we deeply believe slip from awareness when we most need them. In moments of strong emotion or stress, our philosophical commitments vanish, and we react from habit, from conditioning, from the patterns we thought we had transcended. The Enchiridion anticipates this forgetting. It does not scold us for it or treat it as a moral failure. Instead, it provides a remedy, the practice of review. We read not to discover new information, but to remember what we already know, to strengthen neural pathways that weaken without use, to refresh commitments that fade in the face of daily pressures. This is why Stoics recommended reading the same texts repeatedly. The repetition was not about memorization, though memory certainly played a role. It was about formation, about shaping consciousness itself. Just as physical exercise gradually changes the body not through a single session but through consistent practice, philosophical reading gradually changes the mind through patient repetition. There is something deeply humane in this recognition. We are not purely rational beings who, once convinced of truth, naturally embody it. We are creatures of habit and emotion, shaped by repetition and environment. Transformation requires not just understanding but training, not just insight but practice, not just agreement but embodiment. The first rule we encounter, the foundational principle that organizes all others, addresses the dichotomy of control. Some things are up to us, Epictetus tells us, and some things are not. Our opinions, our impulses, our desires, our aversions, these belong to us. Our body, our property, our reputation, our position. These do not ultimately lie within our control. This seems simple enough upon first reading. Of course, we cannot control everything. Of course, external events follow their own logic, indifferent to our preferences. Yet, when we attempt to apply this principle to specific situations, we discover layer upon layer of complexity. Take health, for instance. Is my health up to me or not? In one sense, clearly not. Illness strikes regardless of virtue. Accidents happen to the careful and careless alike. Aging proceeds independent of our wishes. Yet, in another sense, I do have some control. I can choose to exercise or neglect exercise, to eat mindfully or carelessly, to rest adequately or push past exhaustion. Epictetus would say that the actions are mine, the choice to exercise, the choice of what to eat. But the results, whether these actions produce health, how long this health lasts, these lie beyond my absolute control. I can influence outcomes without controlling them. This distinction is crucial and easy to blur. When we confuse influence with control, we set ourselves up for frustration. We do everything right. Exercise, eat well, get enough sleep, and still fall ill. The disappointment we feel reveals our hidden assumption that right action guarantees desired results. But this is not how reality works. We can stack the odds in our favor without eliminating chance, necessity, or the sheer complexity of embodied existence. The dichotomy of control asks us to locate our concern correctly, not in the outcomes, which always remain somewhat uncertain, but in our choices, which lie entirely within our domain. Did I choose wisely? Did I act according to my values? Did I bring attention and care to my decisions? These questions I can answer. Whether those decisions produced the results I hoped for is a different matter entirely. This relocation of concern is liberating and difficult in equal measure. Liberating because it frees us from the exhausting attempt to control what cannot be controlled. Difficult because it requires us to find satisfaction in virtue itself rather than in external validation of that virtue. Consider reputation. Few things feel more important than how others perceive us. Yet reputation lies clearly outside our control. We can behave honorably, speak truthfully, treat others fairly, and still be misunderstood, misrepresented, even slandered. Other people's opinions form in the privacy of their own minds, shaped by their experiences, biases, and limited information. We can influence reputation through our actions, but we cannot command it. Epictetus invites us to notice where we actually place our attention. Do we obsess over what others think? Do we modify our behavior primarily to manage their impressions? Do we feel diminished when criticized and inflated when praised? These are symptoms of having invested our well-being in something outside our control. The alternative is not to become indifferent to reputation in the sense of not caring how we affect others. Rather, it is to distinguish between doing what is right and receiving credit for doing what is right. The first is entirely mine. The second never fully is. This principle extends to all external goods. Wealth can be lost to economic forces beyond our influence. Positions can be eliminated, appointments revoked, authority stripped away. Even relationships, precious as they are, cannot be held by will alone. Other people remain free, capable of changing their minds, moving away, dying before us. When we base our peace of mind on maintaining these external goods, we place our well-being in precarious hands. Not because these goods lack value, they possess genuine value, but because they are not finally up to us. We become like someone who builds their house on land they do not own, always anxious about dispossession, never quite settled. The Stoic response is not to renounce external goods, but to relate to them differently. We can prefer health without needing to be healthy to be at peace. We can value relationships without demanding that they never change. We can pursue success without requiring success to maintain our sense of worth. This is what Epictetus means by treating externals as preferred indifference. We prefer them, of course we do. Health is preferable to illness. Security is preferable to danger. Recognition is preferable to obscurity. But our fundamental well-being, our inner tranquility, our capacity to act virtuously, these do not depend on obtaining what we prefer. The handbook returns to this theme repeatedly because we forget repeatedly. In the abstract, we agree that we cannot control everything. But in specific situations, we act as if we could and should. Someone criticizes us, and immediately we try to control their opinion through explanation, justification, counterattack. Something breaks, and we rage at reality for not conforming to our preferences. Each time we do this, we suffer unnecessarily. Not because the criticism does not sting or the loss does not hurt, but because we add to the natural pain our resistance, our demand that things be other than they are, our insistence that we should be able to control what we cannot control. The Enchiridion gives us another crucial rule. We are disturbed not by things themselves, but by our opinions about things. This principle, which appears early in the handbook, deserves extended reflection. It represents one of the most powerful and most easily misunderstood insights in all of Stoic philosophy. When something unwelcome happens, we lose a job, a relationship ends, an opportunity disappears, we experience distress. This distress feels as if it comes directly from the event itself. The job loss hurts us, the breakup pains us, the missed opportunity disappoints us. The events seem to cause our suffering automatically, as if a physical blow causes physical pain. But Epictetus invites us to look more carefully at the mechanism of our distress. Between the event and our suffering lies something subtle, quick, and powerful: our interpretation. We do not simply perceive job loss. We interpret it as catastrophe or liberation, as failure or opportunity, as ending or beginning. The event remains the same. Our interpretation varies, and with it, our emotional response. This is not to say that events do not matter or that all interpretations are equally valid. Job loss creates real practical challenges. It affects our material security, our daily structure, our professional identity. These are not mere opinions. but the degree and quality of our suffering depends largely on the story we tell about the event. If we interpret job loss as proof of our inadequacy, as a sign that we will never succeed, as the beginning of irreversible decline, we amplify our suffering beyond the practical difficulties themselves. If we interpret the same event as difficult but manageable, as potentially opening new paths, as teaching us important lessons, we still face challenges but without the added weight of catastrophic meaning. The distinction matters because we have far more control over our interpretations than over events themselves. We cannot prevent job loss in every case, but we can examine and revise the stories we tell about job loss. This is where our power lies, not in controlling what happens, but in choosing how we relate to what happens. Examining our opinions requires us to slow down the normally instantaneous process of interpretation. An event occurs. Immediately, automatically, we assign meaning to it. The meaning feels obvious, given, non-negotiable. But this feeling of obviousness is itself part of the interpretive process. When we pause, we discover that other meanings are possible, that our first interpretation is not reality itself, but one possible reading of reality. This pause, this moment of reflection before we fully commit to an interpretation, is where Stoic practice lives. Epictetus calls it examining our impressions. An impression arises. This is terrible. Before accepting this impression as truth, we question it. Is it terrible? In what sense? For what reason? According to what standard? The questioning is not meant to talk us out of legitimate concerns or to deny real difficulties. It is meant to separate what actually happened from our often exaggerated, catastrophizing, or unnecessarily painful interpretation of what happened. Events are rarely as purely negative or positive as our first impressions suggest. Consider how we often generalize from specific events to sweeping conclusions. One project fails and we decide we are failures. One person rejects us and we conclude we are unlovable. One plan goes wrong and we determine that nothing ever works out for us. These generalizations add enormous suffering to already difficult situations. The project failure is painful enough without the added burden of self-condemnation. The rejection stings without our piling on the belief that we are fundamentally unworthy. The disappointment of a failed plan is sufficient. We need not also carry the conviction that we are doomed to perpetual frustration. Epictetus invites us to examine these interpretations not through forced positive thinking but through clear reasoning. Is it true that one failure makes us failures? How many successes would it take to prove we are not failures? If no amount of success would convince us, if we would always find reasons to doubt ourselves, then perhaps the problem is not our performance but our interpretive framework. The Enchiridion offers a specific technique for this examination. When an impression arises that disturbs us, we are to say to it, "You are just an impression, and not at all what you seem to be." This simple statement creates space. It reminds us that our first interpretation is not reality itself, but our mind's initial response to reality. A response we can examine, question, and potentially revise. This practice becomes especially valuable with impressions of harm. Someone insults us, and immediately we feel injured. But where is the actual injury? They spoke words. Those words reached our ears or eyes. Then we interpreted those words as harmful. The harm lives in our interpretation more than in the words themselves. This is not to say insults do not matter or that we should be indifferent to how others treat us. But when we realize that the disturbance comes from our opinion about the insult rather than from the insult itself, we reclaim power. We cannot always prevent insults, but we can question whether we need to be disturbed by them. The handbook suggests we practice this particularly with small annoyances. Someone pushes past us rudely. We spill coffee on our clothes. Traffic moves slowly. These minor frustrations offer low-stakes opportunities to examine our interpretive habits. We notice how quickly we move from "this happened" to "this is terrible" to "this always happens to me" to "I cannot stand this." Each step in that progression is an interpretation, not a fact. Traffic is slow, this is observable. That slow traffic is terrible, this is an opinion. That we always encounter slow traffic, this is an exaggeration. That we cannot stand it, this is demonstrably false, as we are in fact standing it in this very moment. When we practice with small annoyances, we develop the skill of catching our interpretations in larger matters. We begin to notice the space between event and response. We recognize our habitual patterns of interpretation. We discover we have choice in how we assign meaning to experience. Another rule from the Enchiridion addresses how we speak about events. We should not say, "I lost something," but rather, "I returned it." This might seem like mere verbal gymnastics, but the linguistic shift reflects a profound change in perspective. When we say we lost something, we imply that we were meant to keep it permanently, that its departure represents a deviation from how things should be. But nothing we possess is truly permanent. Everything in the realm of externals exists on loan. Our possessions will eventually belong to others or cease to exist. Our relationships will end, whether through death or distance or change. Our position, our health, our very life, all temporary, all borrowed from the universe that gave them. When we understand this from the beginning, when we receive each external good with the awareness that it is on loan, we hold it differently. We appreciate it more fully because we know it is temporary. We suffer less when it departs because we never pretended it would be permanent. We say thank you rather than why me when the time comes to return what was always borrowed. This perspective applies even to people we love. Epictetus offers what might seem like harsh advice. When you kiss your child goodnight, remember that they are mortal. When you embrace your spouse, remember they will not live forever. This is not meant to make us morbid or anxious. It is meant to help us love more truly, more presently, more gratefully. When we forget that everyone we love is temporary, we take them for granted. We postpone important conversations. We hold on to petty grievances. We waste precious time on distractions instead of attention. But when we remember mortality, not obsessively but clearly, we show up differently. We listen more carefully. We forgive more readily. We express appreciation more often. The handbook returns repeatedly to preparation. Many rules address how to ready ourselves for difficulties before they arrive. This practice, which Stoics called premeditatio malorum, involves imagining potential adversities so that we are not caught entirely off guard when they occur. We might rehearse the possibility of loss. What if I lost my job? What would I do? How would I respond? Not with anxious catastrophizing, but with calm preparation. What resources would I draw on? What options would I consider? How would I maintain my equanimity and dignity throughout? This rehearsal serves multiple purposes. First, it reduces the shock when difficulties actually arrive. We have already considered this possibility, so we do not add to the difficulty the sense that it is unthinkable or unbearable. Second, it allows us to plan practical responses in advance, when we are calm and thoughtful rather than reactive and stressed. Third, it reveals which outcomes we are making our peace depend on, giving us opportunity to adjust that dependence before events force the adjustment. The practice is not meant to make us pessimistic or to drain joy from good fortune. Rather, it is meant to build resilience, to ensure that our well-being has a stable foundation. When we know we could handle various adversities, we worry less about them. Paradoxically, preparing for loss allows us to enjoy what we have more fully, without the constant anxiety of protection. Another dimension of preparation involves choosing who we spend time with. The Enchiridion advises us to be careful about the company we keep, not out of snobbery but out of recognition that we are influenced by those around us. Their values seep into us. Their habits become familiar to us. Their way of interpreting experience starts to seem natural to us. If we spend time primarily with people who complain constantly, who treat others cruelly, who measure worth entirely by external success, these attitudes will affect us. Not because we are weak or unprincipled, but because human beings are social creatures who absorb the patterns around them. We become like those we spend time with, often without noticing the transformation. This is why Stoics recommended seeking out those further along the philosophical path. Not to compare ourselves unfavorably or to feel inadequate, but to learn through proximity. We observe how they handle difficulties. We notice their patterns of speech and thought. We absorb gradually and naturally their way of moving through the world. But the handbook also recognizes we cannot always choose our company. We work with certain people. We have family obligations. We live in communities we did not select. So Epictetus offers additional guidance. When we must spend time with those whose values we do not share, we can maintain an inner reservation. This inner reservation is not contempt or superiority. It is a quiet commitment to our own principles regardless of the social pressure around us. Others may gossip, we can choose not to join in. Others may panic, we can choose to remain calm. Others may react with immediate anger, we can choose to pause and reflect. This requires strength, the kind of strength that comes from knowing what we stand for. When we lack clarity about our values, we drift with the crowd. When we know what matters to us, we can remain steady even when surrounded by people moving in different directions. The handbook also addresses the practice of philosophy itself. Epictetus warns against parading our philosophical commitments, against making a show of our reading or our principles. Philosophy is not a costume we wear to impress others. It is a set of practices we undertake to transform ourselves. The warning is necessary because the temptation to perform philosophy rather than practice it is constant. We can enjoy the identity of being philosophical without doing the difficult work of examining our opinions and changing our behavior. We can collect philosophical knowledge without applying it to our actual choices and reactions. True practice is often invisible. It happens in the privacy of our own minds when we examine an impression before accepting it. It happens in moments of temptation when we choose differently than habit would dictate. It happens in our refusal to be disturbed by small annoyances, our patience with others' faults, our honesty about our own limitations. These moments do not announce themselves. They do not earn applause. They constitute the actual substance of philosophical transformation, the quiet accumulation of better choices that gradually reshape who we are. The handbook exists to support this private, ongoing work. As we move through these rules, we might notice certain patterns. Many address our relationship to desire. Many concern our interpretation of events. Many focus on locating our concern correctly. These patterns are not accidental. They point to where our suffering typically originates. We suffer when we desire what we cannot control. We suffer when we interpret events in unnecessarily painful ways. We suffer when we place our well-being in external circumstances. The rules in the Enchiridion address these sources of suffering directly, offering specific techniques for responding differently. But technique alone is not enough. Behind every rule lies a vision of human flourishing, an understanding of what we are capable of becoming. The handbook is not simply a manual for stress reduction. It is an invitation into a different way of being human. More free, more rational, more aligned with nature, more at peace with reality as it actually is rather than as we wish it to be. We arrive now at the place where philosophy ceases to be a subject we study and becomes the very substance of our living. The Enchiridion was never meant to gather dust on a shelf. It was written as a manual to be carried, consulted, applied. Epictetus designed these teachings for daily use, for the moments when we stand at the threshold of choice, when emotion rises, when circumstance presses against us. This is where the handbook truly earns its name. Consider what it means to carry a handbook. A handbook is not a theoretical treatise. It is not written for contemplation alone. A handbook is consulted in the field, in the midst of action, when we need immediate guidance. The carpenter carries a handbook that helps him remember measurements and techniques. The physician carries references that assist in diagnosis. The Stoic carries the Enchiridion for something far more fundamental: guidance in the art of living well. The practical application of Stoic teaching begins with recognition. Before we can apply any principle, we must first recognize the moment that calls for it. This is harder than it sounds. Life does not announce itself with philosophical labels. No situation arrives with a note attached saying, "This is a matter of the dichotomy of control," or "Now you must practice acceptance." The situations simply come, and we must develop the capacity to see them clearly. This capacity to recognize the nature of what faces us is itself a skill that develops through practice. In the beginning, we may only see clearly in retrospect. Hours or days after an event, we suddenly realize, that was a moment when I confused what was in my control with what was not. That was a situation where I treated my impression as if it were reality itself. That was an instance where I forgot that other people cannot be my possessions. This retrospective recognition has value. It builds our understanding. But the goal is to shorten the gap between event and recognition, to bring awareness closer to the moment of experience itself. The first rule we might apply again and again is the fundamental distinction Epictetus places at the very opening of the Enchiridion. Some things are in our control and others are not. When any situation arises, this is our first question. What part of the situation is within my power and what part is not? This simple question, asked sincerely, immediately clarifies our response. Imagine you receive criticism at work. Your immediate reaction might be defensive, hurt, or angry, but pause with the question, what is in my control here? not whether the criticism was given, not the tone in which it was delivered, not whether others heard it, not even whether it was fair or accurate. What remains in your control is how you receive this criticism, how you examine it, whether you find useful truth in it, and how you respond. This clarification does not remove all difficulty, but it removes the futile struggle against what has already occurred and cannot be changed. Or consider a flight delay. The delay itself is not in your control. The weather that caused it, the mechanical issues, the airline's policies, none of these are yours to command. What remains within your power? Your judgment about the delay, your response to it, how you use the unexpected time, whether you remain calm or become agitated, whether you speak harshly to airline staff or with understanding. These choices remain yours completely. The power in this first principle lies not in resignation but in clarity. When we know what we can change, we direct our energy appropriately. When we know what we cannot change, we stop exhausting ourselves in futile opposition. This is not passivity. It is the concentration of our power where it actually exists. Another principle from the Enchiridion that demands daily application is the practice with impressions. Remember that Epictetus teaches us not to be swept away by the first appearance of things. When an impression comes to us, whether it is a thought, a perception, or a feeling, we are to examine it before granting it full consent. We are to say, as he suggests, "You are an impression, and not at all what you appear to be." In practice, this means creating a small space between stimulus and response. Something happens and an impression immediately forms in our mind. Someone speaks to us in a certain tone, and we immediately form the impression, "They are angry with me," or "They disrespect me." The practice is to notice this impression before it becomes a conviction, to see it as an interpretation rather than as plain fact. This practice appears throughout our days if we look for it. You wake to gray skies and immediately form the impression that the day will be dreary. Pause. This is an impression, an interpretation, not the day itself. The weather is one thing, your judgment about the weather is another. You check your messages and see one without a reply. The impression forms. They are avoiding me. They are angry. I have done something wrong. Pause. This is an interpretation, a story you are telling, not necessarily the truth of the matter. Working with impressions in this way does not mean doubting everything or refusing to make judgments. It means becoming aware of the difference between the event itself and the meaning we add to it. It means recognizing that we have more freedom in our interpretations than we usually assume. It means asking, is this impression true? Is it helpful? Is it necessary? Sometimes an impression is simply false. Someone's silence has nothing to do with you. They were busy, distracted, dealing with their own concerns. Sometimes an impression is true in content but unhelpful in emphasis. Yes, it is raining, but calling it miserable weather is an addition you make, not a property of the rain itself. Sometimes an impression is partially true but incomplete. Yes, you made a mistake, but the story that you are incompetent or that all is ruined is an exaggeration your mind has constructed. The practice of examining impressions becomes smoother with repetition. At first, it may feel labored, artificial. You must deliberately remind yourself to pause, to question. But gradually, this questioning becomes more natural. You begin to feel the difference between an impression and a fact. You notice the gap, however brief, where choice resides. You recognize the moment where you might affirm or withhold assent. Consider applying this practice to worry. Worry is almost entirely a matter of impressions. Something might happen in the future, we form an impression of disaster, and we treat this impression as if it were already real. The practice here is to see the impression for what it is, an image of the future, not the future itself. When you notice yourself worrying, pause and ask, what is the impression here? Usually, it is something like, this situation will turn out badly, or I will not be able to handle what comes. These are impressions about the future, interpretations, not facts. You need not replace the worried impression with an optimistic one. That would simply be swapping one interpretation for another. Instead, recognize both as impressions. The future is uncertain. Your capacity to respond is greater than you imagine. And in this present moment, which is the only moment you actually inhabit, you are here, aware, capable of choosing your response. The Enchiridion teaches us repeatedly about desire and aversion, and this teaching too must find daily application. Epictetus tells us to be cautious with desire, to direct it only toward what is truly within our power. When we desire things outside our control, we set ourselves up for disturbance, frustration, and disappointment. When we direct aversion toward things we cannot control, we guarantee our own suffering when those things occur. In practice, this means examining what we want and what we fear, not to eliminate desire or aversion, which would be neither possible nor desirable, but to align them with wisdom. It means asking, am I desiring something that depends on circumstances, on other people, on fortune? Or am I desiring something that depends on my own choices and character? You might desire success in your work. This is natural. But what exactly are you desiring? If you desire that others recognize your talent, that your proposals are accepted, that you receive promotions and praise, you are desiring things not entirely in your control. Others make those decisions. Fortune plays a role. Circumstances intervene. Better to desire that you do your work with excellence, with integrity, with full effort. This is in your control. Whether success follows in external terms is not yours to command, but whether you work well is entirely yours. Or consider aversion. You might feel aversion toward criticism, toward failure, toward loss. These aversions cause disturbance because criticism will come, failures will occur, losses will be suffered. They are part of life, not within your power to prevent entirely. Better to direct your aversion toward things within your control, toward acting with cowardice, toward betraying your principles, toward treating others unjustly. These you can actually avoid if you choose to. This redirection of desire and aversion takes consistent practice. Our natural desires were formed without philosophical guidance. We learn to want approval, comfort, security, and pleasant outcomes. We learn to fear discomfort, rejection, and difficulty. These learned patterns run deep. We cannot simply decide once to want different things and have it be so. We must train ourselves, repeatedly, to align our desires with what we can control and to accept what we cannot. One practical method is to add a clause to your desires. Instead of desiring, I want this project to succeed, you might frame it as, I want this project to succeed, if it is in accordance with nature, but most of all I want to work on it with full effort and integrity. This small addition reminds you where your true power lies. It maintains appropriate preference for good outcomes while anchoring your desire in what you can actually control. Similarly, when you feel aversion towards something, pause and ask, is this within my control? If someone might speak badly of you, and you feel strong aversion to this, recognize that their speech is not in your control. Your aversion cannot prevent it and will only disturb you. Better to direct your concern toward whether you give them just cause for criticism, which is within your control, and to care less about whether they speak badly even when they have no just cause. This does not mean becoming indifferent to all outcomes. The Stoics recognized preferred indifference, things we reasonably prefer but do not need for our happiness. It is reasonable to prefer health over sickness, success over failure, praise over criticism. But these preferences should be held lightly, recognized as not essential to our peace of mind or moral worth. We prefer them, we may work toward them, but we do not make our tranquility depend on them. The handbook teaches us about roles, and this teaching finds constant application in our relationships and responsibilities. Epictetus reminds us that we each play multiple roles: child, parent, sibling, friend, citizen, colleague. Each role comes with appropriate actions. Philosophy does not call us away from these roles, but helps us fulfill them with greater clarity and integrity. In practical terms, this means asking, what does this role require of me? Not what do I feel like doing, not what would be easiest, not what would gain me the most advantage, but what does this role itself call for? When you are a parent, what does that role require? Patience, certainly. Tension, guidance, protection, the willingness to put another's welfare ahead of your own comfort. When you notice yourself falling short in these areas, you are not failing as a person. You are failing to fulfill the role you have taken on. This perspective removes much of the confusion from our relationships. When you are a friend, what does that role require? Loyalty, honesty, the capacity to listen, the willingness to offer help when needed and to refrain from interference when not. These are not arbitrary rules. They are the substance of what friendship means. When we understand our roles clearly, we know how to act without constantly calculating our own advantage. The same applies to professional roles. As a colleague, what is required? Competent work, reliability, cooperation, fairness in dealing with others. These requirements exist independently of whether you like your coworkers, whether you feel appreciated, whether the work is pleasant. The role makes certain demands, and your character is demonstrated in how you meet those demands. But we must also remember that we choose our roles, or we can choose to leave them when they become inappropriate. You do not cease being a son or daughter, but you might choose to distance yourself from a parent who is abusive. You might leave a job that requires you to compromise your integrity. You might end a friendship that has become toxic. Epictetus teaches us to fulfill our roles with excellence, but he does not teach us that we are slaves to every role circumstance has assigned us. The practice here involves both discernment and dedication. Discernment to understand what your roles truly require, to distinguish between genuine obligations and false ones, to recognize when a role no longer serves your capacity to live well. Dedication to fulfill your chosen roles with full effort and integrity, not half-heartedly, not resentfully, but as expressions of your character and your choices. Consider a challenging relationship, perhaps with a difficult family member. Your role as a family member does not require you to accept abuse or to sacrifice your well-being. but it does require you to act with basic respect, to fulfill genuine obligations, to speak truthfully rather than manipulatively. You can set boundaries while still fulfilling your role appropriately. You can limit contact while still acting with decency when contact occurs. Or consider your role as a citizen. This role requires certain actions: obeying just laws, contributing to the common good, speaking truthfully about public matters, voting according to your understanding. It does not require you to agree with every decision, to remain silent about injustice, or to support what you believe is wrong. But it does require you to engage with these matters as a citizen should, with reason, with concern for others, with respect for the possibility that you might be mistaken. The beauty of understanding roles clearly is that it simplifies many decisions. You need not endlessly deliberate about what to do when you understand what your role requires. The role provides guidance. A parent facing a choice about how to spend time knows that the role calls for presence with their children, even when work or leisure might be more immediately appealing. A professional facing an ethical dilemma knows that the role requires honesty, even when deception might be more profitable. Finally, the Enchiridion teaches us to practice what the Stoics called the view from above, the capacity to see our lives and our troubles from a wider perspective. This practice appears in various forms throughout Stoic teaching, but its application is always the same: to lift ourselves out of the narrow, immediate, emotional view of our situation and to see it as part of a larger whole. In daily life, this practice helps whenever we feel overwhelmed by a problem or lost in our own concerns. Step back. Imagine viewing your situation from a distance. You are one person in one place at one moment in time. Your problem, which feels so large and consuming from within, is one small thing happening in a vast world. This is not to diminish your experience or to pretend your struggles do not matter. It is to restore proportion, to see clearly. When you face a difficulty at work, imagine viewing it from above. There is the building where you work, one among thousands in your city. There is your city, one among countless cities. There are billions of people, each dealing with their own challenges, their own concerns. Your difficulty is real, but it is also small. Others have faced similar challenges and survived. You will face this challenge, and whether you succeed or fail in external terms, your character and your peace of mind need not be at stake. Or when you feel slighted or insulted, practice this wider view. Someone spoke to you harshly, and you feel hurt or angry. Step back. In the vast sweep of time, what is this moment? In a year, will you remember it? In 10 years? At the end of your life, will it matter? Not whether the person was right or wrong to speak as they did, but whether you let this brief interaction disturb your peace. Seeing from above, you recognize the smallness of the incident and the freedom you have to let it pass without damage to yourself. This practice extends to our view of time. We tend to live as if we have unlimited time, as if tomorrow is guaranteed, as if we can always begin living well later. The Stoics practiced memento mori, the remembrance of death, not to be morbid but to be awake. Your time is limited. This day will not come again. The people you love will not always be here. Neither will you. This awareness changes how we approach our days. When you remember that your time is finite, certain things become less important. The grudge you have been holding, does it deserve your limited time? The anger you nurse over some past wrong, is this how you want to spend your days? The endless pursuit of more money, more status, more possessions, Does this align with the shortness of life and the certainty of death? Other things become more important. The conversation with a friend, the quiet moment of appreciation, the choice to act with kindness, the decision to live according to your principles today, not someday. The practical application of all these teachings from the Enchiridion requires something simple but not easy: consistency. You cannot practice Stoic philosophy once and be transformed. You cannot read the handbook and immediately live according to its principles. You must return to these practices again and again. You must apply them in situation after situation. You must fail, learn from your failure, and try again. This is why Epictetus called it a handbook. You keep it with you. You consult it regularly. You apply its principles to the circumstances that arise. Gradually, through repetition, these principles become part of how you naturally see and respond to life. The distinction between what you control and what you do not becomes automatic. The examination of impressions becomes natural. The alignment of desire with wisdom becomes your default. The fulfillment of your roles becomes easier. The wider view becomes accessible. The transformation philosophy offers is not dramatic or sudden. It is the accumulation of small choices, repeated consistently over time. Each time you pause before reacting, each time you examine an impression, each time you remember what you control, each time you fulfill your role with integrity, each time you choose principle over convenience. These small moments, multiplied across days and years, create a life that is genuinely different, genuinely more free, genuinely more peaceful. We arrive now at the quiet close of our long contemplation. We have walked together through the pages of the Enchiridion, through Epictetus's simple rules and profound guidance. We have examined the dichotomy of control, the nature of judgment, the discipline of desire. We have explored how a small handbook, carried in the mind, becomes a compass for living. And now we gather these threads together, not to conclude abruptly, but to let them settle into something you can carry forward. The Enchiridion was never meant to be read once and set aside. It was designed as a manual for repeated consultation, a book you return to daily, a source of reminders for when life grows difficult or confusing. Epictetus knew that philosophical principles, however clear they seem in moments of study, fade quickly under the pressures of daily existence. We forget, we react, we fall back into old patterns of thought and feeling. This is not failure. This is the nature of being human. The Stoics never expected perfection. They expected practice, return, renewal. The handbook exists precisely because we need reminding, because wisdom is not a destination we reach and remain at, but a practice we take up again each morning. Consider how you have engaged with these ideas over the past hours. Perhaps some sections resonated deeply, touching something in your experience that needed language. Perhaps other sections felt abstract, difficult to connect to your immediate concerns. Both responses are valuable. Philosophy works in its own time. Ideas that seem distant now may suddenly become clear months from now when circumstances shift and you remember something you heard, some principle that suddenly applies. The beauty of the Enchiridion lies in its portability. Not the physical book, though that matters too, but the portability of its teachings. You can carry the dichotomy of control into any situation. You can remember that your judgments create your disturbance, not external events. You can pause before reacting and ask what is actually within your control. These tools go anywhere you go. Epictetus taught in a school, but he prepared his students for life beyond those walls. He knew they would face challenges he could not predict, situations where no teacher would be present to guide them. The Enchiridion was his answer to that inevitable separation. It distilled what mattered most into principles portable enough to carry through any circumstance. You now possess something similar, not because you have memorized every teaching, but because you have spent time with this way of thinking. You have heard it, considered it, let it work on you. The practice of Stoicism begins not with perfect understanding, but with willingness to engage, to return, to try again. Think of how athletes train. They learn fundamentals, practice them repeatedly, return to basics even after years of experience. No athlete considers this beneath them. They understand that mastery emerges from consistent practice of simple principles, not from constantly seeking advanced techniques while ignoring foundations. Philosophy asks the same devotion. The Enchiridion offers fundamentals. The dichotomy of control is not a beginner principle you graduate beyond. It is the foundation you return to at every level of practice. Marcus Aurelius, emperor and advanced Stoic practitioner, reminded himself of these same basics in his meditations. He did not move past them. He deepened his relationship with them. As you move forward from this extended reflection, consider what it means to carry a handbook with you. Not necessarily the physical text, though having it available certainly helps, but the internal handbook you have begun to build. This internal version consists of principles you have understood well enough to remember, examples that clarified their application, moments when you recognized a teaching playing out in your own experience. This internal handbook grows through use. Each time you successfully apply the dichotomy of control, you strengthen your understanding of it. Each time you catch yourself making things good or bad through judgment rather than seeing them as indifferent, you clarify that principle. Practice does not just repeat what you know. It deepens your relationship with it, reveals nuances you missed before, shows you applications you had not considered. The Stoics spoke of philosophy as medicine for the soul. Like physical medicine, it must be taken regularly to work. A bottle of medicine sitting unopened on a shelf helps no one. The Enchiridion, unread or read once and forgotten, remains potential rather than actuality. But engaged with regularly, returned to often, applied sincerely, it becomes what Epictetus intended, a source of guidance, clarity, and peace. You might wonder how to maintain this practice beyond today. The answer Epictetus would give is simple: return to the fundamentals. Do not worry about becoming a perfect Stoic or achieving some advanced state. Focus on what you can do today. Can you distinguish what is yours from what is not yours? Can you examine your judgments when you feel disturbed? Can you treat the challenges that arise as training rather than misfortune? These practices, simple as they sound, contain everything you need. Epictetus built his entire teaching on them. The Enchiridion keeps returning to these same themes because they apply everywhere, always. They do not wear out through repetition. They deepen through it. Consider establishing a simple daily practice. Perhaps reading one section of the Enchiridion each morning. Perhaps taking a few moments before sleep to review your day through a Stoic lens. Noticing where you maintained your practice and where you forgot it. Perhaps carrying one principle into your day as a focus, trying to remember and apply it as situations arise. These practices need not be elaborate. The power lies not in complexity but in consistency. 5 minutes of genuine engagement each day builds more understanding than an occasional intense study session. The daily return matters most. Keeps the teachings alive, active, present in your mind when you need them. You will forget. You will react without thinking. You will get caught up in things outside your control, treat indifference as genuinely good or bad. Let your judgments create unnecessary disturbance. This happens to everyone who practices Stoicism. The question is not whether you will falter, but whether you will notice and return to practice. This returning is itself the practice. Epictetus would not scold you for forgetting or reacting poorly. He would ask what you learned from it, what you notice now that you missed in the moment. Each instance of forgetting becomes an opportunity to understand more deeply why these practices matter, what pulls you away from them, what you need to remember. The transformation Stoicism offers unfolds slowly. You do not become a different person overnight, but you do begin to notice shifts. Situations that once disturbed you deeply create less turmoil. You catch yourself judging things good or bad and remember they are indifferent. You find it easier to distinguish what you control from what you do not. These small shifts accumulate over time into genuine change. This gradual transformation reflects the nature of character development itself. Character forms through repeated action, repeated choice, repeated practice. You cannot think your way to virtue, though understanding matters. You must practice your way there, building new patterns of response through patient repetition. The Enchiridion guides this process by keeping the essential practices clear and accessible. Some days the practice feels natural, almost effortless. You remember the principles without struggle, apply them smoothly, move through your day with unusual clarity. Other days feel difficult. Every situation a challenge to your practice, every moment requiring effort to remember what you know. Both types of days contribute to your development. The easy days show you what is possible. The difficult ones build your capacity. Do not measure your progress by how you feel on any given day. Feelings fluctuate. They respond to sleep, health, stress, countless factors outside your control. Measure your progress instead by your trajectory over time. Are you slightly better at applying these principles than you were months ago? Do you notice your reactions faster? Do you return to practice more quickly after forgetting? These subtle improvements matter more than dramatic transformations. They indicate genuine change taking root rather than temporary enthusiasm. The person who makes small, consistent progress over years develops far more than the person who has intense insights that quickly fade. Epictetus emphasized this patient, persistent approach because he knew philosophical practice requires time to reshape habits of mind formed over decades. You have spent your entire life developing certain patterns of thinking and reacting. They do not dissolve in weeks or months. They yield gradually to new patterns, built consciously through practice, reinforced through repetition, strengthened through application. Think of this as learning a new language. At first, you must translate consciously, slowly converting words from your native tongue into the new one. Every sentence requires effort, but gradually, with consistent practice, you begin to think in the new language. Words and phrases come naturally. You no longer need to translate. The language becomes part of how you engage the world. Stoicism works similarly. At first, you must consciously remember to apply the dichotomy of control, deliberately check your judgments, Intentionally examine what you are treating as good or bad. This feels effortful, artificial even. But with practice, these ways of thinking become more natural. You find yourself automatically distinguishing what is yours from what is not, naturally examining judgments before reacting to them. This naturalness does not mean the practice ends. Even fluent speakers continue learning their language, discovering new nuances, deeper expressions. Even advanced Stoics continue practicing fundamentals, finding new depth in principles they have worked with for years. The practice evolves but never concludes. As our time together draws toward its close, recognize that you are not finishing something but beginning it. These hours of contemplation plant seeds. What grows from them depends on whether you water those seeds through continued practice, continued return to these teachings, continued application in your daily life. The Enchiridion remains available to you. It does not change or disappear. Whenever you need guidance, whenever you feel confused or disturbed, whenever you want to remember what matters most, you can return to it. The same teachings will be there, but you will read them differently each time. Your circumstances change. Your understanding deepens. You notice things you missed before, find relevance in passages that previously seemed abstract. This is how living texts work. They grow with you because you bring new experience to each reading. The words stay the same, but their meaning expands as your capacity to understand them develops. Epictetus wrote for students at all levels of practice, from beginners just discovering Stoicism to advanced practitioners needing reminders. The Enchiridion serves both equally because it presents fundamentals that matter at every stage. Carry this with you, then, in whatever form serves you best. Perhaps the physical book becomes a companion you return to each morning. Perhaps you memorize key sections that speak most directly to your circumstances. Perhaps you simply remember the core principles, letting them guide your thinking even when you do not recall exact words. What matters is not perfect retention but genuine engagement. The Stoic life is not about perfection. It is about direction. It asks where you are heading, whether your choices and practices align with wisdom, whether you are moving gradually toward greater virtue, clarity, and peace. Some days you move quickly. Some days you stand still or even slip backward. What matters is that overall, across weeks and months and years, you are oriented toward what the Stoics called living according to nature, living with wisdom, with virtue, with understanding of what genuinely matters. This orientation changes everything while requiring no dramatic external shifts. You can practice Stoicism in any circumstances, any role, any life situation. It does not demand you leave your work, abandon your relationships, or reject normal human life. It asks instead that you engage your life differently, with clearer understanding of what is yours and what is not, with better judgment about what deserves your concern, with more wisdom about how to respond to what happens. Epictetus lived this truth. Enslaved for much of his life, later teaching in a simple school, he never held wealth or political power. Yet his freedom was complete because he understood what was actually his. His peace remained undisturbed because he recognized that circumstances do not create disturbance. Judgments do. His life demonstrated that happiness does not depend on external conditions but on internal understanding. You have this same capacity, not because you are special or uniquely talented, but because you are human, possessed of reason, capable of examining your thoughts and choosing your responses. The Stoics believed these capacities exist in everyone. Philosophy is not for an elite few. It is for anyone willing to think carefully, practice sincerely, and return again when they forget. As these hours together conclude, let yourself settle into what you have heard. You need not remember everything. You need not feel you have mastered these teachings. You have spent time with them. You have let them work on you. That is enough for now. The practice continues in your daily life, in small moments of choice, in quiet applications of principles you have begun to understand. The handbook remains with you, not as a burden to carry or a test to pass, but as a resource to return to, a source of clarity when things grow confused. Epictetus offers you the same guidance he offered his students 2,000 years ago. The wisdom has not aged. Human nature has not changed. What disturbed people then disturbs us now. What brought them peace can bring us peace. This continuity across centuries reveals something important. The Stoic teachings point to truths about human experience itself, not passing concerns of a particular era. This is why they remain relevant, why they continue to help people find their way through difficulty toward greater peace and wisdom. They address what is fundamental to human life, how to think about what happens to us, how to respond to circumstances, how to live well regardless of externals. You join a long tradition of people who have found value in these teachings. From Epictetus' students in ancient Rome to readers across the centuries, since countless individuals have carried the Enchiridion with them, return to it for guidance. Let it shape their understanding and practice. You are part of this ongoing conversation, this continuing exploration of how to live with wisdom and virtue. The conversation does not end here. It continues in your practice, in how you apply these principles to your circumstances, in what you discover through your own experience. Stoicism is not a dead philosophy preserved in ancient texts. It is alive wherever someone genuinely practices it, wherever someone distinguishes what is theirs from what is not, wherever someone examines their judgments and chooses their responses with care. Let this long contemplation settle into silence now. Not an empty silence, but one full of what we have explored together. The dichotomy of control, the nature of judgment, the difference between what is truly good and what is merely preferred, the power of treating challenges as training, the freedom that comes from understanding what is actually yours. These ideas do not need more words now. They need time, space, practice. They need your life to work through them, testing them against experience, discovering what they mean in concrete situations. This is how philosophy becomes real, not through endless study but through sincere application. Carry the handbook with you, not anxiously, as something you must perfect, but peacefully, as something that helps you remember what matters. When you forget, return to it. When you feel disturbed, consult it. When you want to deepen your practice, study it again. It will be there, patient and unchanging, offering the same simple rules that have guided seekers for centuries. The Enchiridion asks nothing impossible from you. It asks only that you distinguish what is yours from what is not, that you examine your judgments rather than assuming they are true, that you treat apparent goods and evils as indifferent, that you work with what is given rather than fighting reality. These practices are simple, though not easy. They are accessible to everyone, though mastered by few. They offer everything you need to live well, though they promise nothing you cannot provide yourself. Rest now in what you have heard. Let these teachings work in you quietly, without forcing or grasping. Trust that what you need to remember will return when you need it. Trust that the practice will unfold naturally as you continue to engage it. Trust that you carry with you right now everything Epictetus wanted to give his students, not perfect knowledge but good direction, not complete mastery but sincere practice, not arrival but the path itself, clear and walkable, leading toward greater wisdom, virtue, and peace.